tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. All right. So, for a few weeks, we've been talking about the Brahma Viharas, these 4 states or qualities that the Buddha talks about. Sometimes they're called the 4 immeasurables. They get translated as loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. The core quality is metta, often translated as loving kindness. I like friendliness is the literal. Metta or maitri means friend or friendly. So friendliness, benevolence, warm-heartedness, kindness. There's a different word for that we would translate directly as love, emma or prema in Sanskrit. But sometimes I'll translate metta simply as love as well, depending on context. And we've talked about how the 4 states are really expressions of one core state in different conditions or contexts. So from this basic state of metta, the heart that learns to rest in friendliness, initially in an expansive way beyond personal affection, so learns to rest in friendliness, not just for those we love and for our friends, but for neutral people and even for people that are difficult for us, and then gradually toward all beings of all species in all places. The practice trajectory is toward widening the circle that we can feel warm toward in the heart. And so that's true for all 4 of these qualities. And the meditation itself, in the early texts, simply speaks about radiating the quality in all directions, in the 4 compass directions and above and below. And one of the most delicious ways to practice this is to let it ride on the breath and then bring the breath kind of out radially to the felt sense of the whole body, and then saturate the whole body with the breath energy suffused with this quality of loving kindness or metta or any of the qualities. And so there's a trajectory from the individual to the relational to the broadly interpersonal, and then all the way out to the transpersonal. So the meditation really, in the end, becomes this absorbed state where the feeling can feel like it spreads, throughout the known universe, or as large as your imagination can extend. And this can become a very stabilized, deeply pleasurable, embodied kind of absorption or jhana state. So that's how all of the meditations work. You have this core quality of metta that when it encounters suffering or pain, dukkha, in the world, it turns into its natural expression, which is compassion. The Pali word is karuna. And I like we were using in the meditation, I like the English gloss feeling with for compassion, which is almost a literal translation of the Latin. And Karuna has that sense of the heart just vibrating at a different frequency when it encounters suffering. And there's really the sense that it's not a different quality. So this core quality of friendliness is not something other than compassion, but that compassion is the natural coloring of that friendliness when it encounters pain in the world. The third of the qualities, sympathetic joy. Sometimes I'll just use the word celebration or appreciation for this. Mudita is the Pali. This is the flip of that. When basic friendliness or benevolence encounters goodwill, good fortune, pleasure, it can respond by appreciating and celebrating that. right? And the corollary to both compassion and celebration is that when this quality is mature, these feelings become available without clinging. So, in the case of compassion, without pity or guilt or blame or shame or fear or the kind of hooked in feeling that can feel like, vicarious trauma in a way. Like, if I really hook into the pain that's happening over here, it wounds me in a certain way, or I get hooked into needing to become a savior or somehow fix it, or I don't know what to do, and that's alarming to me. All of that can be set down as this quality of just basic feeling with is cultivated. And what we're looking for is again, for this the quality of compassion to be able to expand infinitely, really. And it's impersonal and it's transpersonal in this way. So I can feel compassion for the suffering of people I don't know, but even, and this is always where we get tripped up, for people who are difficult to feel compassion for, even people that are the perpetrators of the harm that's causing this pain in many cases. And and so this quality then, you know like friendliness, when we expand it through the neutral people and difficult people out to all beings, it has this tone of yes, transcending, but also, like, I like the phrase transcend and include. Like, it goes beyond but includes or scoops in everybody, you know everybody in the way. So in the same way, right, compassion, we find ourselves protected from different forms of grasping that we could get hooked by when we encounter pain. In the same way with joy, we find ourselves protected, or we practice toward being protected from jealousy, comparing, attachment. You know, um, I learned a really beautiful uh, Jewish phrase from my teacher Sylvia Borstein once, a long time ago, that can be said when you encounter somebody else's good fortune, like you really want to get married and somebody else is getting married. And instead of being jealous or resentful, you can say, may your joy soon be mine, something like that. May I soon experience that joy as well. And you sort of transmute it just a little bit. It still has a bit of the flavor of like, oh, why not me? But you can hold it in such a way that you can simultaneously appreciate the other, and you know without losing yourself. And so appreciation has some of this quality, and we'll talk more about appreciative joy as we go on. The last one, equanimity, upekkha in Pali, is the wisdom side of this basic friendliness that understands pain, it understands pleasure, and it understands that pain and pleasure come and go based on conditions or contexts. And so, in the same way, it finds its way toward the impersonal, the transpersonal, eventually the cosmic, like the sense that everything unfolds because of the momentum that led into it. It's really, equanimity is based on the teachings on karma or kama. And so this gives the heart a doorway into being able to be warm of heart, to be present and intimate with, to feel with, to celebrate with everything, really without exception, because there's enough wisdom to know that none of it is a threat to me, none of it is a challenge to me, none of it needs to be grasped onto or identified with as myself or mine. So that's the general trajectory of these four states, the Brahma Viharas, the divine abidings. And so we've been talking mostly about metta and spreading metta through the felt sense of the whole universe, through to the transpersonal. When metta becomes compassion. So when we are in the process, let's say, of cultivating loving kindness, spreading it outward, bringing it to more and more beings, or offering it to more and more beings, inevitably, very quickly, we come into contact with that which is painful, right? We have the parts of our own story that are painful. We have the people close to us that are in pain in various ways. Our community, our culture, our species, our planet is in pain in various ways. And you see it immediately, of course, right? Anytime you look, you'll see it. And one of the dangers in compassion practice is that it can have a near enemy that in trauma work we would call negativity bias, where when you become aware of anything, you can see the painfulness in it, right? And the Buddha, in many ways, suggests that we do this, right? He says, watch out for the clinging. So when I feel, the twinge in my neck that says to me like, oh, tension headache, I feel it, it's painful, I don't like it. And my natural instinct is to not want it, to push it away, to be afraid of it, or to be angry with it, or just to wish it was not happening. It's difficult to just feel for myself in that experience of pain without getting caught in the wishing that it were different. And of course, when I see a friend of mine recently suffering, as I am seeing right now, a friend of mine suffer, I care for them and I want their suffering to be eased. But I can also feel how close there's that hook of like, it's terrible that they're having this experience, or if only it were different, or if there were anything we could do. And it's good to reflect on the possibility of helping, right? Like, is there something I can do? Can I talk with them or someone else, or is there some way that I can help? The impulse towards service is still not the same as the heart's contraction. And the thing that we are warned to watch out for is the heart's contraction. The way that in the background, or sometimes very much in the foreground, of this wish to relieve suffering is a kind of hook that gets down to something like a core belief that it'll be like, things are not okay if this keeps happening, or I won't be okay, or it will break me or them, or in some way, right? I can't bear it for this to be this way. And we feel this sometimes when it's someone we love who's suffering and we can't actually save them from it. We can't intervene in their situation enough to save them. Something more is needed. And I think a lot of us can feel this. I certainly feel this in relation to the larger community in the world, where I see something going on out there, and I can do some things, right? I can speak with my elected representatives, I can give money, I can go to the march, I can talk with people, there's so many things we can do. And my heart could still get hooked into, this is somehow intolerable, I can't bear it. And that can become a feeling about the world that's very difficult to bear or even to live in. The world is so hurt. The beautiful poem of Warsan Shire, who who says, I ran my fingers across the atlas of the world and asked, where does it hurt? And it said, everywhere, everywhere, everywhere. The sense, the awareness of how much pain there is can be overwhelming. And we can have a nervous system that sees the painful before the beautiful. And we can be very habituated to that. And so compassion practice can stumble into that, right? When we are encouraged to feel this tenderness of the heart, this feeling with, along with suffering. Part of how this can be held, or how we can be protected from it, is to understand that we don't develop the Brahma Viharas in sequence, but in a way we can't fully develop or really dive into any of them, any of the first three, loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, without some equanimity, right? And partly that just means without some mindfulness, which is the core quality that lets us know what we're feeling when we're feeling it without being lost in the story or the energy of it, right? If we immediately get lost in the story of a trauma whenever we come into its vicinity, it's like a black hole just sucking light into itself. One time when I was doing um, trauma counseling sessions, doing somatic experiencing, I was working with someone who had a very intense but distinct kind of traumatic location in their psyche, in a way, connected with things that had happened. And for a while, we did a kind of a dance where, it was a little bit like anytime they looked toward it, it would feel like they would just like fall into it and kind of crumble, and their coherence would be lost. And eventually, eventually we went in through the safer, for many people, less triggering channel, which is the image channel rather than the somatic. And I said, okay, if this thing were like, a thing, what would it be like? And they were like, it's like a deep black pit, bottomless. I said, okay. And if you were able to look at it and feel no danger of falling in, how far away would it have to be? And they were like, like a couple miles over there. I'm like, great. So it's a couple miles over there, but you can see it. How's that? Right? And they were like, ugh. But I'm like, okay, we can deal with that. That works, the shudder, because you have to be able to look at it, but you need whatever resources, supports, necessary to be able to look at it. And so, you need some amount of protective skills, qualities, communities, support to be able to be in the presence of the painful. And so mindfulness is, on the internal level, the basic skill here. Because then, I could say, what does it feel like to see that deep, bottomless black pit 2 miles away? And they're far enough away from it that they can say, it sends, a shiver of dread through my body, but I can bear it. And, that mindfulness of the state is protective, right? Because other times when we were too close, I would say, what's it like, being in the presence of this thing? And they would just, either space out or not even be able to describe it, or get really freezy and lost, or, some other energy would move through. And it's like, okay, drop it, look away, you know. The joke in the trauma counseling world was, you know, if you ever stumble into, somebody's black hole, you say squirrel, right? You just startle them to look over there, and you get attention out of the black hole, right? You need to not be the light that falls into it. You have to bend the light around it. And so in compassion practice, we have to feel with suffering. We also have to be protected from it enough that we can feel it without crumbling ourselves. And so, like the metta practice, there's, structurally in the practice, there's this opening out of um, the diameter of your care in a way, right? Traditionally, you would start with yourself. A lot of people find that hard, so you start with someone who it's easy to feel compassion for, someone you love easily, uncomplicatedly. You work your way through yourself, the good friend, the benefactor, neutral people, difficult people, and then groups of beings out there. If we think about that as the traditional sequence, widening the circle of care, it might make sense why one of the things that's most overwhelming for many of us is the news. Because in a way, when I read the news, I'm being asked to hold in compassion, thousands, potentially millions of people who are either, some of them are neutral to me, right? Some of them I care closely about, and some of them are very difficult people to me, right? Out there in the news, all the evil people make the news, right? So that's serious practice, to see that, feel it, care for it, not fragment, right? To stay in my body, basically, to stay in my heart with loving kindness. And so the beginning part of the practice then is to, start with an easier ambit of care, right? So just like in metta, I might start with, a good friend. That's hard enough, right? To not get sucked into fixing or, fixating. But I'll start with basic loving kindness, give rise to the quality of friendliness, ideally not in the presence of the painful yet. So loving kindness is like the palate cleanser or the baseline, right? And often when you're doing this in formal practice, either on long retreat or, or if you took it on as a continuous daily practice for a while, you would do loving kindness practice, basic metta, for a long time before you went into formal compassion practice, because you want to be able to access this baseline friendliness as a home base, So like, work through your difficult people, right? Spend some time walking through the streets of your town, just sending friendliness to everybody in a non-creepy way, be invisible. But just kind of shine love at them, without them knowing. And watch out for being preferential, right? Don't just shine love on the attractive people, but everybody, really, everybody, all, you know. Um, and so you start to feel into how it is to move beyond the instinct of preferring some people over others, right? And it doesn't mean you stop preferring the people you prefer. But metta is a different practice, right? So do your friendliness practice, at some point. That's fine. Be friendly with the people you want, have boundaries with the people you don't want to be friendly with. That's great. With metta, you do it invisibly but universally, and you practice. Okay, I can feel friendly toward this neutral person. And then you start doing your difficult person practice, right? You bring to mind the people that really get your goat, and you work with it. You really stay with, you know, they don't deserve kindness, or I just don't want to send them kindness, or it doesn't feel good to send them kindness. And you just keep doing it, right? To send somebody kindness or compassion is not to approve of their actions in any way. You can be deeply critical of somebody's actions and choices and still not uh, limit your own practice of expansiveness because of them. To allow a difficult person out in the world to limit your practice of metta is like saying, I will sacrifice the inner state of fully expanded love because I resent this one person. I'm going to make them an island of non-love in my ecosystem. And I think that just privileges them way too much. And so eventually you practice with the super difficult people. You're like, yeah, you too, buddy, you know? And it's fine if you want to be like, may you heal so much that you don't abuse people anymore. Like do that, if you need to justify it. May you become so healed that you become not a schmuck. Like, great, may it be true. But you have to figure out how to care in that way. So then once loving kindness, I think, is accessible enough, you don't have to become like a master of it, right? But like once it's accessible enough that you can call it up, you're moving through the world, and you can kind of just remember to turn on the light of friendliness, right? And you can figure this out. You can just be like, oh, metta. And it can just be like a boop. And suddenly, you just move through the world differently. It's great, right? And you don't lose your discernment and your critical thinking. Um, but you get nicer about it, to be honest, which is very helpful for many of us. So then with loving kindness as a baseline, of course you're going to be encountering you're going to be encountering suffering all the time, even while you're doing this. It's natural, it's everywhere. But the formal cultivation of compassion, really kicks in when we have access to this loving kindness as a baseline. And then when we encounter something painful, we consciously bring it up. And you don't even need to consciously bring up compassion. Like, may I feel compassion for, the children in this war zone, or the people of this or that group or identity being abused. All you have to do is bring up your friendliness, because friendliness, when it encounters pain, naturally vibrates as compassion, as care. And compassion maybe is a stiff word, for this thing that just, I think, when we are not terribly wounded, I think is natural to us as human mammals, which is to care for the well-being of living things, of all things. And I don't know if you can hear it, but my kid is singing like outrageously joyful songs just across the wall in the bathroom, like, sort of procrastinating bedtime, but also just being so joyful. So there you go. I have mudita for that. Unless it's difficult, at which point I have compassion, because bedtime can be like that too. So, but it is a bit of a task to concentrate on what I'm saying while this outrageous, like, bippity boppity boo is going on over there. Blessings to them. The formal cultivation of compassion comes when we have enough access to this baseline friendliness that when something painful comes into the field, we can root in our kindness, root in our friendliness, in the metta. And then from that place, I think partly how it feels is that it gives me an anchor, a kind of a refuge, really, right? That's partly what Brahma Vihara means. A vihara is a safe resting place on a pilgrimage. So it gives you a place to kind of root down when the startling material comes in. And with that refuge, then I can resist the despair, overwhelm, judgment, hatred, all of the qualities that might so easily pour in, and so, in meditation, when you do this, you can get into the stream of basic metta, like we did in the meditation tonight. Bring in an image, usually is an easy enough way to do it, of something or someone who's having a hard time. As always, start easy, right? And again, it's the same progression from personal to neutral to difficult to all beings in various categories. So you start with something, bring an image, and then just feel with it, let go of any narratives that float through of fixing or worrying about or complaining about or just wishing it weren't so. The core wish in the compassion practice is, I see your suffering, or I feel with your suffering. May your suffering be eased. And then, just as with the metta practice, we just let it expand, more and more out through the categories of beings, or just with the breath out through the whole body, until you have the sense of the whole body kind of pulsing or radiating just with this energy that's kind, and that cares. So that's most of what I want to say about karuna, compassion. And just a tiny little ending note here about what has been kind of pulled out of the mix and isolated as self-compassion, because it's so difficult for people. It's really part of the whole sequence. But for many of us, our psychology is so wounded in the relational and in the sense of individuality and in the sense of self-worth, that it can actually be challenging to care in a way that's wholesome about our own suffering. And that partly seems weird. Like, of course I care about my suffering. Like, I wish it was better or different. But it can so easily trip, over self-blame or shame or guilt, um, all the different kinds of self-hatred that are, just so fundamentally unuseful on the path, unwholesome, not helpful, painful themselves. And so if that's part of your experience, when you bring up friendliness for yourself, or you bring up care or compassion for yourself, and you find it hard to find, um, see if you can notice which of these hindrances or obstructive qualities it is that blocks you. Why is it hard to care for my own well-being? And if you'll find a story, most likely, and it's probably really old. And so if you find it, the guilt or the shame or the blame, then you turn your friendliness toward that quality. So don't worry about turning it on yourself yet, but turn it toward the quality. And you say, that, like, you externalize it a little bit. Oh, this guilt or this shame, I was taught this, or I learned this, or this was embedded through trauma. One of those or all is going to be true, right? Like, we never choose to be miserable in those ways. It's given to us. It's a terrible gift. And so you can see that, and you can say, oh, that quality, like, oh, that's painful. And in a way, you just bring mindfulness to it. That's painful, and encourage yourself in whatever way is helpful. I'm willing to put this down. I'm willing to no longer be afflicted by this. Get out of my system, you demonic rat. Like, however you want to talk to your demons, you can talk to them in that way. There's other ways to work with them, right? You can ask them what they need, what they're still hungry for after all these years. You can dress them up in funny costumes. You can do it. You can do all sorts of things with them, but they all have the effect of remembering that they're not you, and that you don't own them. They don't own you. They're not something that defines you. And as soon as they're not you, you can actually send them compassion just as much as any difficult person. So you're really doing difficult person practice with yourself, or parts of yourself. And it works in the same way, right? You learn to say, I don't approve of your actions, ancient guilt, but, may your suffering be eased. And so it's the same practice then for ourselves as with, anyone else out in the difficult world. All right. So then, as practice matures, we're relaxing and expanding toward the same kind of vastness, that we touch in all of these, with all of these qualities. The sense of myself and what I am and what you are and what others are just softens. The sense of even being this species, not just this race, this gender, this whatever, but this species, this earthling just softens. And the sense, the heart of compassion becomes this kind of, in the meditation, it just becomes this field that you can rest into. And sometimes we call that field, or some traditions call that field, Kwan Yin, Kwan Yin, the one who rests at ease hearing the cries of the world. Other traditions just call it the Great Mother, or the Earth, or the heart of wisdom. So may our practice of encountering the painful be supported in vastness and clarity and wisdom. All right, pausing there. Thanks for listening.